Hello and welcome. Britons go to the polls on Thursday, but will voters be choosing a political party or a celebrity? For the first time in its history, Great Britain held live televised debates that pitted the leaders of the top three parties, Labour, Conservative and Liberal Democrats, against each other. It was the performance of Lib Dem leader Nick Clegg that surprised many and at one point moved his party from third place to neck and neck with the frontrunner, David Cameron's Conservative Party. The historic nature of the live debates and slick performances are being compared with the popular show X Factor, a sort of pop idol competition. Critics of this fear that the parliamentary tradition where voters base their choice on party politics may be lost. They say the election has been turned into a glorified popularity contest. On today's show, we ask, has the X Factor changed the face of British politics? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or an email, and we welcome your phone calls onto the show as well. Joining me now from London is Ian Dale, a Conservative blogger and contributing editor and columnist for GQ magazine. He's authored and edited more than 20 books and has worked as a lobbyist. Also in London is Mark Seddon, Al Jazeera's former UN correspondent and a respected writer and commentator who was editor of Tribune magazine. He's also a regular contributor to many UK newspapers, including The Guardian and The Independent, as well as The Spectator and New Statesman magazines. Mark was editor of the Tribune. Gentlemen, I welcome you to the show. And Ian, if I could start with you there. Now, it seems that politicians versus personalities, why is it that there is, the policies have given way to personalities? Why are people voting for the person they like more than what they're promising?
Well, I think to a certain extent that's always been the case. If you think back to the US presidential election in 1960, when Kennedy and Nixon debated, people actually judged that on what Kennedy looked like rather than necessarily on what he said, because if you listen to it on the radio, Nixon won the debate. I think it's slightly unfair, though, to characterise the three TV debates in this country as all being about an X Factor personality competition, because policy was discussed for 4.5 hours. And all those people who, before the election, said, oh, well, there's no difference between them, all the political parties are the same, after those three debates, I think probably had a bit of a different point of view.
All right, well, Mark, I guess British politics could hardly be called dull nowadays. What do you think has driven this, or at least certainly this showbiz feel to it this time?
Well, of course, they always used to say that politics is show business for ugly people. I mean, paradoxically, we've got two quite good-looking politicians who, and particularly the Liberal who you mentioned, Nick Clegg, who the children seem to like, and lots of other people like. I mean, this was the first televised debate that we've had, so it's a bit of a transformation. Gordon Brown, who is on the losing side, it seems, is probably regretting that he ever agreed to it. But there's no doubt that this did suddenly launch and make the election extremely exciting. It had been very boring up until that stage. However, I mean, I do disagree with Ian to an extent. I accept that there has been some debate about policy, but essentially many of the big policy issues which the main parties agree on, there hasn't been much debate about. And the other thing that we've kind of lost is, well, we haven't heard from academics. We've hardly seen any women, we haven't seen any trade unions, we haven't seen any business people. This whole election has essentially really been around three leaders.
Mark, let me put an email question to you, if I may. I'll get back to you in a second, Ian. Just a quick email that came from Wahid Parker, one of our viewers, who wrote in saying, all elections are popularity contests. Politics is about convincing people that you should be in power rather than delivering on promises. So I wonder, does that mean that accountability has gone out of the window?
Well, he's got a point. I mean, what's been very interesting too, though, is that, yes, of course, it's about power. But what began to happen was that a lot of the commentators and a lot of the more respected institutes and foundations began to say, well, hold on, they're not really discussing the things that really matter. A lot of people on the doorstep were complaining that they weren't discussing the deficit and the state of the economy. And suddenly the political parties that had all worked out how they were going to run this campaign suddenly had to talk much more detail about some of the things they felt rather uncomfortable about. I mean, Ian will remember the Institute for Fiscal Studies, which a week or so ago essentially said that all three parties weren't telling the public the truth about the public finances and the state of the economy. So you've got a very interesting mood out there amongst people, because people are quite sort of angry now. It's gone from apathy to anger because they feel they're not being told the truth by their political classes.
Well, now, Ian, the Mark had mentioned that there are a couple of good-looking candidates in the process. Now, an email we had from Luciano Di Floriano in Italy says, The use of social networks sounds like a popularity contest to gain more votes, but at the same time a sign of modernization. And I wonder how much the new media factor has played a part in how people regard the candidates.
Well, I think the internet in this election is the dog that hasn't barked. Everyone predicted this would be Britain's first internet election, but it hasn't been anything of the sort. We haven't seen the kind of style of campaigning that Barack Obama indulged in the United States. British political parties, yes, they've got their websites, they've got all sorts of gimmicky things on their websites, but they haven't utilised them in the same way that Obama did. The bloggers haven't really broken many stories in this election campaign. They haven't claimed many scalps. A couple of candidates have been embarrassed through things that they wrote on Twitter, but you can't say that the internet has had a major effect on this election so far, which as a blogger myself I kind of regret. But I think because of our electoral system and the fact that our campaigns are concertinaed into 3 or 4 weeks, unlike the United States, which is in perpetual election campaigning mode, actually means that we probably never will have the kind of internet election that other countries do.
Talking about America, you raised the Obama factor. Now, while some think that the X factor elections are quite sensational, others, particularly Britain's allies across the pond in America who are used to celebrity-style elections, are making fun of it. Now, Comedy Central's Daily Show with Jon Stewart, which focuses on politics and issues in the news, has had a field day with the British election campaign. Let's see this.
Manchester, in the heart of the northwest of England, is tonight host to a British political first. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the first time on British television, live in front of a representative studio audience, the first election debate.
I mean, it's just the open. It gives you a feel of what we're trying to do, and just the first atmosphere. What do you think?
It's okay.
It's okay?
It's okay.
It's still okay.
Graphics are a little 1980s PBS, but
okay.
You know, it's not terrible.
Okay.
Staging was a little 1990s Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
All right, okay, that's okay.
Music was a little over-dramatic and cheesy.
Right, so we got that right.
Yes, that was actually well done.
So there, of course, we had Jon Stewart in the Daily Show, and one of his reporters there, John Oliver, commenting on the elections. Mark, I was wondering, you know, there are those who feel that the British election has moved more towards the American presidential system in the way it's being elected and so on. And then America, on the other hand, seems to be more going towards the parliamentarian system with its shuffling and debating of issues between the two parties.
Yeah, well, there's more of a dynamic, I guess, in America now, because there was certainly more of a divide when Obama was elected. But, you know, it's very interesting just listening to that clip, because I was talking to a journalist the other day. What people in America haven't yet seen is something that is being talked of here as Cleggmania, if you can get your head around this. This
right.
Liberal Democrat leader is being feted. I mean, actually, people are getting quite excited about him. And some people are they've actually been comparing him to President Obama. But according to this journalist I was talking to, that typically Clegg will arrive and there'll be hundreds of people waiting for something really profound, and they clap and they get all excited, and then Clegg gets up and he says, and point number 3. And the whole speech falls totally flat. So we haven't had that excitement.
No.
I mean, some people may be excited about it, but there's one other issue, which is, I think, quite an important one, is that what we have had are national polls that are all over the place, and immediate polling after each of these debates. And some interesting cross-fertilisation between Sky Television, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch, and the first the first poll that is announced after that show comes from The Sun, owned by Murdoch, and YouGov. And these polls have pushed things in a way that polls haven't before, perhaps. I don't know if Ian agrees with that, but I would certainly want to see all of these polls banned during an election, as happens in France.
Ian, a couple of email questions. You know, we talked about the televised debates there, and we saw that clip from the Comedy Central show, the Daily Show. Here, there's two. One, I'll do them back to back. The first one from Pakistan. Khawaja Ikram ul Haq in Pakistan says, the televised debates allow everyone to learn more about the candidates, which is an advantage that town meetings and party rallies do not provide. And the other one that came in from the United Kingdom, from Abdul M. Ismail, says, what the televised debate has done is bringing politics face to face with a large majority of apathetic voters in a way no one has ever experienced. Now, I know you commented at the beginning of the show how those televised debates did touch on a number of key issues, and Mark had mentioned they talked about issues that perhaps they weren't initially comfortable about. What do you think it'll do in terms of affecting voter turnout? Do you think people have been charged up by what they've seen on TV and by the campaigning? Will they come out more, or is it still going to be one of those, they scrape through a voter base?
Well, the reason we haven't had these TV debates before is because we don't have a presidential system, and all the party leaders always argued that we shouldn't have them because it was about electing a parliament, not electing a president. But now we've got them. I think they're going to be here to stay. But the one unhealthy thing about these debates is that they have dominated the whole agenda of the election, because you have the 2 days before the debate where the media speculates on what's going to happen. You have the day of the debate, and then you have 2 days after the debate with a post-match commentary. Now, that means that most of the campaign has been taken up with discussion about the debate. So I think in the future they'll want to look at the number of debates and when they take place. But it's true, people have been energised by them, and I think turnout will be probably around the 70% mark now, whereas at the beginning of the campaign most people were expecting turnout to be the lowest ever, maybe between 55 and 60%. Ipsos Mori did a poll showing that only 55% of people were certain to vote. Now, that same poll yesterday showed that 68% of people were certain to vote, but there's a huge number of undecided voters, and the result will, I think, largely depend on those 30% of people that apparently go into the polling booth not knowing who they're going to vote for. I mean, I find that incredible that anybody could go into a polling station and not know who they're going to vote for. But as their pen hovers, those are the people that David Cameron, the Conservative leader, needs to get on side if he's going to get a majority tomorrow.
Well, gents, I'm going to ask you to stand by. We'll have more with Ian Dale and Mark Seddon in a moment. But when it comes to British politics, few have held the stature of the former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, known as the Iron Lady. We'll take a short break, and when we return we'll have a familiar face visit the studio with her own unique perspective on the UK's election. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're discussing the showbiz factor that many people feel is dominating the British general election. For the discussion, I have Ian Dale, a Conservative blogger and former lobbyist, and Mark Seddon, a respected writer and commentator from the other side of the political fence, who was also Al Jazeera's former UN correspondent and New York bureau chief. Now, both are in London. As we get back to some questions, Ian, this issue of the special relationship between America and the UK, that seems to have really faded under Gordon Brown. To what degree do you think that's something that people are going to be looking for again, or what influence do you think the outcome of this relationship will have on that relationship?
Well, it's been a subject which hasn't been raised once in any election debate that I've heard. I think most British people almost take the so-called special relationship for granted, but I think we have moved into a different era now, beyond the Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair era, who are very, very close to US presidents of both persuasions. But I think David Cameron, if he's elected, he hasn't got a reputation as being maybe quite as pro-American as Margaret Thatcher was. He's always said he would want to be a critical friend, because a lot of the electorate feel that Tony Blair was just George Bush's poodle, and when George Bush said jump, Tony Blair would say how high. And I don't think any British Prime Minister wants to get the reputation that Tony Blair had, even though, of course, Tony Blair is incredibly popular even now with the American public.
Mark, we've seen more endorsements by celebrities. You know, we've got the Harry Potter actor Daniel Radcliffe and Colin Firth backing the Lib Dems. We've got Michael Caine showing up for the Conservatives, as well as Simon Cowell now. I wonder to what degree that's also something that's fairly new. And has the campaigning become very negative? I mean, are people looking at more what the other why you shouldn't vote for the other party rather than why you should vote for us?
Well, I think there's always been quite a bit of celebrity endorsement. I'm not altogether sure that people are going to be that swayed about those sorts of things this time round. I think most people in Britain realise we're in for some very, very bumpy times economically, and very nervous and very worried, and really also want to send a pretty powerful message to the politicians that they don't like what they've been doing. So yes, I mean, I think that the answer to the second part of your question is that people are also thinking, you know, quite tactically in some respects, and have also been vacillating and thinking, well, perhaps we ought to teach them all a lesson and effectively give them a hung parliament.
Right.
That may be beginning to change now as David Cameron begins to pull away. But yes, I think that a much more serious mood has taken foot in the country, and I think partly it's also a reaction to some of those issues you were just talking about. Then there hasn't been any profound debate about foreign policy, about the war in Afghanistan, for instance, and of course not much of a debate about some of the really serious economic issues either.
All right, 40 seconds to go, 20 seconds each. Mark, while we've still got you up there, a prediction for what's coming up, and then I'll get to Ian. Just 20 seconds.
A narrow Conservative win, I think, if not very possibly a Lib-Lab pact with Nick Clegg being pushed forward as the Prime Minister by various Labour people, since they can't possibly have Gordon Brown as Prime Minister.
All right, and Ian, your prediction, please. Quick one.
Nick Clegg will not be Prime Minister. That's one firm prediction. My prediction is David Cameron will get a narrow majority. I agree with Mark, probably about 12 seats, but there's a 50-50 prospect of a hung parliament.
All right, well, there we certainly will be watching. It's certainly got everyone's interest going, so thank you both for joining me.
Thank you.
Now, there's a saying that that a politician is a person who approaches every problem with an open mouth as opposed to an open mind. And strong leaders such as Britain's Margaret Thatcher, who led the country from 1979 till 1990, who made a name out of being tough. In her case, the nickname was Iron Lady. But there's no doubt that Margaret Thatcher knows British politics. So what does she think of the current lineup for this election and how they seem to be in a personality race? Let's get a perspective on that, starting with the showbiz feel of the campaigning.
Everything is show business, and the person who started it was me. You know, I always wanted to look glamorous in what I wore. Previous prime ministers couldn't have coped. Can you imagine Churchill in earrings and pearls fighting Hitler? No, no, no. But today you've got to do that. Even in these very, very tough economic climes, you've got to wear the right clothes. Though, of course, the Queen is set an example because she's very economical with her clothes. Do you know what she does with her old clothes? She wears them. She does.
Now, in terms of Tony Blair...
May I ask her... Please let me finish. It's an important point. Had I still been Prime Minister, running that place across the road, you would have been given a knighthood for services to broadcasting. So for this interview alone, it's Sir Riz.
I might chase you off on that. I would chase you off on that. That would be delightful. Now, when you look at John Major, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, you know, your successors, they certainly didn't seem to have the glamour and style that you certainly brought to the British politics.
No, no, no. And I think that's very, very important. But of course, the person who set me thinking about this was Ronald Reagan, who went from show business into politics by becoming the President of the United States. Show business into politics, or was that the other way round? One can't always tell with America, can one?
Well, that relationship, that special Thatcher-Reagan relationship you set up, became synonymous with the famous special relationship, as it was known, between America and Britain. And I wonder, when you look at the way things are going now, the media seems to think that special relationship has gone now.
No, 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 it's still there. I remember saying to Ronald, or as I prefer to call him, Bronco, I said to Bronco, an exclusive here for Al Jazeera television. Do you know, Ronnie used to always send me a Valentine card. Did you know that? And it was signed with a loving kiss. I later discovered that a cross was how he wrote his name, but that's not here nor there. No, I think it's very, very important that we have a good relationship between Britain and America. Another exclusive for Al Jazeera. I wanted to make Britain a part of America. Oh yes, the 51st state. But then, of course, if I'd have become American, that would have meant that when I went abroad, I would have to pretend I was from Canada, and that would be very confusing.
Now, what made you look west as opposed to those neighbours just across the channel, the French, the Germans, the Italians, and so on?
The French?
What about the relationship with Europe?
The French? A very good tip for all prime ministers. This was my European phrase book. And do you know, Sir Riz, it says no in 13 languages. 999.
What about your take on the current lineup for the election? Then we've got David Cameron, Gordon Brown, Nick Clegg. Any of these strike you as being worthy successors?
I met the future former Prime Minister Gordon Brown the other day. May I say this about Gordon? Gordon always smiles first thing in the morning, just to get it over with, he does. And then, of course, who were the other two you mentioned?
It was
Cameron.
Right. and Clegg.
David Cameron, yes. Apparently he is the leader of the Conservative Party. They get so young. They're so young looking nowadays, aren't they? And yes, David Cameron. Now, I've seen his election. He's always in shirt sleeves. Have you noticed that? Always in shirt sleeves. He wants to be friendly with everybody. Personally, I find him a bit too friendly, David Cameron. You know, the sort of man that would call John the Baptist Jack. That's too much. That's too much. And then, of course, there is Nick Clegg. Now, can I explain to your viewers, 180 million people, that Nick Clegg, before this election, was completely unknown in Britain. And now, thanks to international television, he's unknown throughout the whole world.
Is there no room for a third party in Britain?
No. No, there isn't. And in fact, I think there's no real need for a second party in Britain. Because when I was Prime Minister, I won 3 elections, you know. And what I did was this. I said to the British people, if you don't agree with me, I shall pull out your arm socket and hit you with the soggy end. And that got them on my side.
Well, Lady Thatcher, a quick final word of advice from you then to whoever wins the election. What would you tell them?
Emigrate.
Lady Thatcher, thank you very much.
As quickly as possible. The pleasure, Sir Riz, has been all yours.
I like that title. Thank you very much. And our thanks to Lady Thatcher, otherwise known as comedian Stephen Allen, for joining us from London. A fitting end to our look at the upcoming vote. And again, a big thanks to Ian Dale and Mark Seddon for giving us some analysis before that. Now be sure to stay with Al Jazeera for live coverage of the British elections from our London News Centre, and we'll keep you up to date on everything that's happening during the vote. And remember, you can follow the Riz Khan Show on Facebook. You can see what we're up to there. You can give us your feedback on topics and post your questions and comments. Until then, from me and the team, we'll see you next time.